What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Your only 365-day-a-year Packers video podcast, videocast, whatever the heck you want to call it. I always appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time. We've got a great episode lined up for you today. I want to talk about Khalil Mack, of course, the big news from Thursday. He is headed from Chicago to the Chargers. We'll cover all of that. There's some Kirk Cousins rumors, some MVS rumors, a potential wide receiver that maybe Green Bay has some interest in, a lot going on. But before we get to all of that, I do want to quickly talk a little bit about Jordan Love and a couple things that I failed to cover yesterday. I saw some of the comments and wanted to address a couple of those things very quick. The first comment that I saw on a couple different occasions was about his contract. So while technically Jordan Love would have a slight cap savings by trading him prior to June 1st, which if there was a trade, it would almost surely be before June 1st. It is a ever so slight cap savings. Technically, it would be a little bit more costly because you'd have to replace him with a backup quarterback, which then his salary would be on the record and so on and so forth. So yes, there would be a cost to trading Jordan Love on this roster, but nothing that you wouldn't it would never be in consideration. The cost is less than $1 million. And again, technically it's a slight cap savings by just trading him outright, but the overall net loss would be less than $1 million and nothing that you would actually base your decision off of. So for anyone that was, questioning or commenting, well, it's going to cost more money for them to trade Love, it's minuscule, very, very minuscule. And yes, every dollar and cent is going to matter this upcoming season. But if you got a deal that you wanted to take, you're not even remotely considering the salary cap implications of this season and so on and so forth. So yes, that is not an issue whatsoever if Green Bay did want to trade Jordan Love in that capacity. Secondly is, I know a lot of you, or at least a couple of you, posted about the fact that, Green Bay needs a good backup quarterback. What happens if Aaron Rodgers goes down injured? And of course, as the famous saying goes, I think it was the Indianapolis Colts, you don't practice effed. If Aaron Rodgers goes down, you're effed, right? You're screwed. You're completely and utterly screwed if Aaron Rodgers goes down for any extended period of time. Now, with the state of the NFC North, with Jordan Love, could you win enough games to maybe still be in the playoff picture? Sure. And do I think the backup quarterback position should still be of interest, where maybe you don't just go into the season with Kirk Benkert? Sure. But again, you are operating this season and next season under the impression that you are all in with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And if all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers goes down with some sort of injury for 8+ weeks, you're probably screwed no matter what. So, you're not, I would not be concerned over that if I were the Packers. I would again be focused on the three things that I mentioned yesterday. How do you feel about Jordan Love and his long-term potential? Do you think Rodgers is going to be here for 2 to 3 years? And then what can you get back in draft compensation for Jordan Love? So enough about that, but I wanted to address those couple things. I don't think that, needing a backup quarterback is really that important for these next couple seasons. And again, I do not believe that his contract and what it would cost Green Bay would factor into their decision in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think either of those would necessarily be a factor. All right. Let's move forward to the main topic for today, and that's the move where the Chicago Bears traded Khalil Mack to the Chargers. They get a second-round pick this year, a sixth-round pick in 2023 in exchange, and I saw a lot of different things about this trade. And yes, Chicago bought very, very high on Khalil Mack when they first brought him in. However, you have to remember, he was much younger. He was in his prime. He was a dominant playmaker. And Chicago was basically using the formula of young, cheap quarterback who was ready to maybe take that step, surround him with an amazing defense, a lot of weapons on offense, and go out and win playoff games. It's basically what the Rams did with Jared Goff. They came up, of course, a game short. The only issue for Chicago is, of course, Mitch Trubisky was not ready, and they lose in the season that they had their best chance, even when Mitch was okay, they lose in the opening round on the double doink, right? And then they only went downhill from there. They didn't have the right coach. They didn't have the right quarterback. Everything else they sort of did right to buy in, go all in when you've got a cheap quarterback, a young quarterback. Just they got the quarterback wrong. If that would have been Patrick Mahomes, they would have been set. They would have been very, very set. Probably would have won a Super Bowl. There's a big difference between Patrick Mahomes and Mitch Trubisky, thankfully for Green Bay, not so thankfully for Chicago. But That's why they went all in and gave up all the picks that they did to get Khalil Mack in the first place. So now, you look at it and say like, wow, they only got a 2nd-round pick and a 6th-round pick for Khalil Mack. The number one thing I can tell you when you see these trades, and just like the name doesn't add up with the compensation, right, is you have to look at the contract and you have to look at the age. And you look at the age, the decline in play from Khalil Mack. That's not to say that he's not a really good player, because he's still a really good player, but he's not the guy that he was 3 to 4 years ago. Look at the age, his play and decline in play, and then a massive contract that the Chargers are taking on, and you start to put the pieces together as to why it was a 2nd-round pick and not a 1st or multiple 1st or things like that. If it's a much cheaper contract, if he's a bit younger, if he's still in his prime, you're going to get major picks in return. Instead, because of the contract and the age and the decline in play, you're only getting a 2nd and a future 6th. And I saw a lot of people kind of beating up on Chicago, saying like, the picks that you got in return didn't exactly match what you were hoping for. For that caliber of player. I thought actually Chicago did a really nice job here, and I think the trade makes a ton of sense for them. I don't like to exactly say that, but I do think it's the case. So the first thing I would say is, again, I talk about this all the time. What window are you trying to open? And right now, there's no window for Chicago. Justin Fields clearly is not ready to just all of a sudden step up and be a top-tier quarterback. And even if he does, right, even if he plays great this season, the supporting cast around him, from offensive line to weapons to the defense, which is also in decline, like, it's going to take a few years for this team to really get ready, get some younger talent in, and start maybe potentially competing, right? And again, if you're a Green Bay fan, which most of you are listening to this, of course, you don't hope that happens. You hope that they continue to be a middle ground, or maybe Justin Fields doesn't develop, etc. But if things go accordingly for Chicago, they still need young talent. And by the time that all happens, by the time that comes to fruition, Khalil Mack is well past his prime, still making way too much money, and you got nothing in return for him. So Khalil Mack does not make sense in the window that Chicago is trying to open. Very similarly to Bobby Wagner the other day. As soon as you move on from Russell Wilson, it no longer makes any sense to keep Bobby Wagner around. Now, is he a team leader and a team captain, and can he help develop some players on the team? Sure. And could there have been a price point where that makes sense to keep that type of player when you're trying to rebuild? Sure. But there's a good chance Bobby Wagner doesn't want to be part of that. As he winds down his career, he probably wants to go and compete, and you probably sort of owe it to him at that point to allow him to do that. There's not going to be a team that trades for him because of his contract and age and things like that. And again, by the time Seattle opens up a new window and finds a new quarterback and everything like that, Bobby Wagner is way past his prime. So it just makes sense for Seattle to move on, similarly to the Bears right now with Khalil Mack. Now, getting a top, or a mid-second round pick and a future 6th, again, I think based on the contract, based on the age, based on the decline, I like this deal for Chicago. I think it makes sense. I think they got the most that they possibly could. Now, you do go back to last season and you look at Von Miller at the trade deadline, and the Broncos got more for Von Miller on the trade deadline on an expiring deal than the Bears did basically for Khalil Mack. So you do wonder a little bit if maybe that, if the Bears would have waited, maybe even towards the trade deadline this year, if maybe some top contending teams maybe would have competed for his services a little bit more. However, that also runs the risk of Khalil Mack getting hurt or having, some sort of injury where he's not tradable. A variety of things could have happened, right? And in that situation, you don't get anything in return. So I'm sure Chicago shopped him around the league. I'm sure they didn't want to keep him in the NFC North. I'm sure there's some teams they wouldn't trade him to. They ultimately ship him to the AFC, team him with Joey Bosa with the Chargers, and I think they got fair compensation. Is it going to be something that completely alters the state of the Bears with a 2nd and a 6th round pick? No, it's not, but it's still the right move. You decide that Khalil Mack is not part of the next championship window that you're trying to open in Chicago, and you get the most that you possibly can. You call all around the league, say who's willing to offer, and it's basically an auction at that point, and they found that they could get a 2nd and a 6th for him, and that's what they did. I think, again, it's overall a smart move by Chicago. I hate it for Green Bay because what you want to see these teams do in the NFC North or in the NFC is completely play that middle ground, right? It's what I talked about with Green Bay when I said with Aaron Rodgers, either give me an A or give me an F. Either go all in and bring everyone back and try to get as much talent on this team as you can, or sort of go in the opposite direction and start an aggressive rebuild with as many draft picks and, as much talent as you can possibly get to open up that next window. Chicago's made the decision. They need to get younger. They need to get talent that they can open up, again, a window maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now. I think that makes sense for them. And again, I would prefer them to see that, stay in that middle ground and keep Khalil Mack and just never have an opportunity to really refresh, right? This is giving them an opportunity to refresh. Keem Hicks is a free agent. Allen Robinson is a free agent. They have a lot of opportunity to get younger and more talented. And remember, they gave up a lot of first-round picks, or at least a couple of this year's first-round pick, etc., for Justin Fields. Like, they have to recuperate some picks and start getting younger. I think this is the right way to go. I give Chicago credit for making a move that I know isn't, I'm sure, probably not going to be super popular with Bear fans. Now, AFC West meanwhile, the Chargers are now teaming Joey Bosa with Khalil Mack. I have a feeling the Chargers are going to add more pieces to that secondary. Justin Herbert at quarterback. They just bring back Mike Williams. I am so excited to watch the AFC West next year. The Chargers, the Broncos, of course the Chiefs, even the Raiders. Like, just put all of those games in primetime Thanksgiving, like just all of it. Those games are going to be epic. Great quarterbacks and really good football teams. Cannot wait to see how that division develops. And in the same week, you have Russell Wilson and Khalil Mack go to AFC West. Should be a ton of fun this upcoming season. Now, as I mentioned, there's also some Kirk Cousins rumors. And very similarly here to what we just talked about with opening a window and so on and so forth, I think you can make an argument that there's no championship window with Kirk Cousins as quarterback in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins is the epitome of mediocrity. And listen, there is a lot of value in having a quarterback like Kirk Cousins who can go out and not lose you games. Maybe he's not going to win you games, but is a solid quarterback. He's like the classic middle of the road quarterback. And last year he played quite a bit better than that, to be fair. But he's not going to be the guy that usually leads you, or just not usually. He's not going to be the guy that leads you to a Super Bowl. He's not going to be the guy that elevates the rest of your team. Can he be good? Can he help you win? Yes. So from a Green Bay standpoint, you sort of love Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. Because you know what? As we saw last year, that's a team with Kirk Cousins that can beat you in any given moment. You have to play them hard. You have to play them tough. If you don't play your A game, that's a good enough team with a good enough quarterback to beat you on any given Sunday. But you're certainly not concerned about them going on a playoff run and winning a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins with that roster. They need a much better roster surrounding Kirk Cousins. And when you start paying him $45 million per year, that limits the amount of talent that you can have on your roster. Where again, if it's an Aaron Rodgers or a top-tier quarterback, a Mahomes, etc., you can get away with that price point. With a Cousins, it's going to be a lot harder. So if Minnesota does end up trading him, it'll be clearly very interesting to see what direction they go with, if they go with a younger quarterback or what they do. But I think that also makes sense for Minnesota depending on what they can get in return. Now, there's risk there as well. Minnesota could go into no man's land, not have a future quarterback. They're going to have to work towards getting that next franchise guy. And there's more safety in having a Kirk Cousins, but they just have a new GM, new head coach. They have the ability to be a little bit more risky there. They know they're not going anywhere anytime soon, and acquiring some picks and getting out of that salary, I think makes sense. So again, I don't like it for Green Bay. I would love them to keep the middle ground, right? Keep that 9-8 season going every year. Would love that for them. But I think this makes more sense where they can start a refresh, trade away Kirk Cousins, maybe get some picks, get off that salary, and start a rebuild for that franchise. I think that makes a ton of sense. We'll see what they do. Now, you do have to wonder just how much Aaron Rodgers' decision factors into this, right? Aaron Rodgers leaves, and the North is totally up for grabs. Justin Fields takes a step, and they could easily win the North, right? Kirk Cousins and that Vikings team with no Aaron Rodgers is probably the favorite in the division. Detroit Lions, like, they're still up and coming. They're not that, like, that division becomes much more interesting if there's no Aaron Rodgers and it's a Jordan Love-led Packers team. Aaron Rodgers comes back, the Bears and Vikings might say, yeah, probably not winning the division this year or next year. Let's try to open up. What we know Green Bay is probably going to struggle in 3, 4, 5 years from now. That is going to be a tough team for them to build. We think that the window is, again, 2024, 2025, 2026. Let's work towards that. You wonder how much that Aaron Rodgers decision factors in to all of a sudden the Bears trading away Khalil Mack, maybe the Vikings trading Kirk Cousins. I think it should factor. I think it did factor, and we might see the Vikings and the Bears sell off a little bit more, not try to win this season quite as much, and the NFC North could be very brutal outside of the Green Bay Packers if that does in fact come to fruition, and if both of those teams decide to go younger and start building towards 2024, 25, 26, etc. Couple other quick news and notes here. Some rumors around there that MVS may go for $10 million per season. I just don't see any way where Green Bay gets involved in those discussions. A deep threat like that, I understand it, but listen, Rodgers and MVS have never been exactly on the same page. I don't think that's Rodgers' fault. I don't think that's MVS's fault. I just think for whatever reason, it's that chemistry's never been there. And MVS has always had some injuries, some mistakes. I don't touch it for $10 million, especially where Green Bay is at from a salary cap standpoint. I would go as far to say I would be very shocked if MVS is back on this team this upcoming season, if his contract is in fact anywhere near the $10 million per season. Another contract I wanted to discuss, because I've been talking about Alan Lazard and his contract and how Green Bay has a tough decision to make because that second round tender, which they would probably have to give him to keep his services, is around $4 million. That $4 million cap hit becomes a lot more difficult. However, as Zach Cruz pointed out on Twitter yesterday, they could do the exact same thing that they did with Robert Tonyan last year, get him to sign that 1 year, almost $4 million deal, and then put a bunch of void years on top of it with a restructure, putting it out over about 5 seasons where it becomes actually less than $1 million or, ish for, I guess, probably about 1.5-ish, maybe 2 million for this upcoming season. And you can have a much more cap-friendly contract for Alan Lazard while keeping him on the team. The more I think about it, and as Zach pointed out, I expect that to happen where Alan Lazard is back on a 1 year, around $4 million deal that they then restructure, give him void years, and bring that salary cap hit down. So that is where I am leaning right now. Ray McCloud, Steelers kick returner, punt returner, wide receiver. Rumor that Green Bay may have some interest in him. Would like that move. I think he would be a upgrade as a returner immediately. Also may have some deep threat, deep speed that they could potentially use if he could get a little bit better as a wide receiver. It would be a sort of a low-cost flyer at that position, but an immediate upgrade at returner. I like the deal if Green Bay would go in that situation, depending on how much he would cost. San Francisco rumored to be interested as well, but a potential name to keep an eye on, specifically as a returner, maybe a little bit as a receiver this upcoming season. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but one name that Green Bay could be interested in. Those are the type of names that Green Bay is going to have to potentially find, right? The high-priced guys are probably going to all be out of their range. A guy like Ray McCloud very much could be in the range that they're looking in. Also released, Cory Littleton, former Rams linebacker, former Raiders linebacker. Of course, the Raiders were the ones that released him. Could absolutely see Cory Littleton being in play. As I mentioned yesterday, Jordan Hicks from the Cardinals could be in play if Devondre Campbell's not back. Cory Littleton could be another one that could be in play. Has some familiarity in that Rams defense, which of course Joe Barry runs, and I think he could make a very logical fit. I know he was a name that a lot of people, myself included, were interested in when he was a free agent a couple years ago. Didn't end up working out that way, and instead they go in a different direction, then end up with Devondre Campbell this past season. But if, again, they can't work out something with Campbell, there's a lot of options out there, from Bobby Wagner to Jordan Hicks to now Cory Littleton. A lot of free agent linebackers that would not cost in the compensation formula, where if Campbell moves on, they could pivot to one of those guys. That is going to do it for me today. Always appreciate you joining me. As always, I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.